Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of Divrei HaMembet, that is the second book of Chronicles. We are about to study chapter 9. Now, chapter 9 recounts for the second time in Tanakh the story of the visit of the Queen of Sheba to King Solomon, to Shlomo HaMelech, a very famous episode. But many people don't fully appreciate the significance and importance of this chapter. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this chapter is one of the most important chapters in Tanakh. I know that's a very bold statement, but what do I mean? This chapter is meant to demonstrate and show us the height to which the Jewish people can achieve their very mission, the mission that's been given to them by God as a chosen people. And this is an example of where we can go and where Shlomo HaMelech just about made it. King Solomon just about made it to the fulfillment of the purpose of the Jewish people. But unfortunately, failed in the end. Now, in chapter 9, we're not going to read of the failure. We're going to read of the success, where he got to. Now, what do I mean? How could I make such a bold statement? Before I read chapter 9, I think it's important for us to go back to two key passages in the Torah. And mention, of course, that there are many, many other passages that lead to that discuss these issues throughout Tanakh, throughout the words of the prophets. But these two are key, and will develop the theme that I'm trying to make. And many of these verses are going to be familiar to those that are familiar with the Torah, but let's go ahead and read them just so that I can make the point I'm trying to make. So the first one points to Genesis, the book of Genesis, chapter 18, where it is discussing the story of the three visitors, the three travelers who visited Abraham and Sarah and brought to them the promise that they are going to have a son who eventually was going to be Isaac. And after the three visitors left, God was going to destroy the people of Sodom. And he says in verse 17, this is in chapter 18 of Genesis, am I going to keep a secret from Abraham that which I'm doing? And then God mentions, why is Abraham so important? And why specifically is he so important when I am about to destroy a nation, the nation of Sodom, or Sodom, if you will? That is not Abraham's nation. That's a different nation. It's another nation from the world. So God says, and I'm looking at verse 18, and in here we can see what the purpose of choosing Abraham as the forefather of the great nation of Israel, right? What's the point? What kind of nation do I want? What am I trying to build from Abraham? He's the father of whom, for what, for where? So let's read verse 18. Avraham and Abraham hayo yihiyeh l'goy gadol. He is going to be a great nation, v'atzum, and very powerful, v'nivrechuvo, and through him shall be blessed kol goyei haaretz, all of the nations of the world. This is a key verse in understanding the purpose and the point of choosing the Jewish people. They're going to grow. They're going to be a great nation. And the purpose is so that they should be a source of blessing to all the nations, all the nations of the world. The purpose of the Jewish people is that they should reach a height, a spiritual height, a social height, which will then influence all the nations of the world. Ki yidativ, we're not finished yet, right? How does this work? What does this mean? What level do they need to achieve in order that what do they need to do? What's their task? How do we go about becoming a nation that then positively influences the entire world? Ki yidativ, because I have known him, I know Abraham. and I know what kind of a person he is, and I know what kind of a nation he can build, because he is the kind of person who can instruct his children. He can instruct his descendants and his family that succeeds him for generations to come. That what? That vishamru derech Adonai, they should be able to keep the path of God if they stick on the proper path. And what is the path of God? La'asot, to do tzedakah u'mishpat, righteousness and justice. Leman havi Adonai al Avram es asher diber alav. This is, and if they follow on that path, then God will and this is why God will bring upon Abraham those promises that he made to him. So therefore, I need to discuss with him what I plan on doing, because he is responsible not just for his own children, but the influence that his children and his children's children and so on and so forth for generations to come, right? The influence that they will have on all the other nations of the world. This is key. La'asot tzedakah u'mishpat. If they do tzedek u'mishpat, justice and righteousness, and Abraham is the one who can teach his children to stay on this path. So here we see that it is the job of the Jewish people to follow a path of tzedek and mishpat, justice and righteousness, and thus, if they do that, they will then positively influence v'nivruchu vo. Through them will be blessed kol goyei haaretz, all the nations of the world. That is one passage that is crucial to understand and recall that in order to study the story of the Queen of Sheba and understand its importance. Now I want to look a little bit later on in the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy. This is Devarim, Perek Daled, that is chapter 4 of Devarim, where Moses is now addressing the people before he departs this world. And he tells them as follows, right? Re'ei limadati eschem. See, I have taught you chukim umishpatim, laws and rules. Remember, Moses has now spent his entire life and career teaching the Jewish people the laws of God. Those laws, those chukim umishpatim, which of course lead to a path of tzedek and mishpat, right? Same word, mishpat. Kasher tzivani Adonai Elohai, like the Lord my God has commanded me to do this, to teach you the laws, how to live. La'asot kain, in order that you should do it b'karav haaretz, within the land, asher atem bo'im shamal rishta, that you are coming to occupy and inherit that land. In other words, where will you fulfill this mission that I chose Abraham for, and I chose you as a people for, to live the life of justice, right, in this land? Ushmartem va'asisem, and you will be careful and you will do those laws. You will keep those laws. You will live that way. Why? Ki hi chachmaschem ubinaschem. This is your wisdom. This is your understanding. This is what makes you wise in the eyes of the other nations. They will hear all of these laws, and they will say, excuse me, that this nation is a wise and understanding. This great nation is a special, wise and understanding nation. So here we see the next step, right? How is it that we bring about blessing to the entire world? By living the way God wants us to live. And then the rest of the world will come and they will learn from us. The verses continue, but we're studying Chronicles now. I'm going to go back to it, but I want you to keep these things in mind as we see this demonstration, and how right now the chronicler is trying to show us that Solomon was just about there. In the days of Solomon, this could have been, if not for some failures, which we're not going to read about in chapter 9, but we will read about in chapter 10 and further on. If not for those failures, this could have been it. It could have been done. We were in the land, but finally the temple has been built, and a nation built on justice and righteousness is just about there with a few small flaws, right? And those small flaws which some of which we read about in the preceding chapters here in Divrei Yamim, and we read about a lot in the Book of Kings. If not for those flaws, this could have been the end. This could have been the fulfillment of the promise. The entire world could have come under the banner of tzedek umishpat, justice and righteousness, as is repeated over and over again throughout the prophets. So now let's go focus on the chapter we're about to study together, and remember to bear in mind all of the things that I just read to you. Verse 1, Umalkat Sheva, and the Queen of Sheba, somewhere probably located in modern-day southern Sudan, Ethiopia, somewhere around there. The Queen Shama'a, she heard at Shema Shlomo, the news about Shlomo, she heard that there's this wise and special and great king. And she came to test Shlomo out with chidos. Chidos is often translated as riddles. It may have been with riddles just to see how smart he was, or it may have been she had deep questions, many questions about the world. Who knows what her questions were? We don't know from this chapter all of them. L'chayel kaved ma'od. She came with a great accompaniment of diplomats and officers, etc. Ugmalim nosim b'samim, and camels that were loaded with special spices. V'zahav larov, and a lot of gold, ve'evan yikara, and precious stones. Vatavo al Shlomo, and she came to Shlomo, v'tidaberi mo eis kol asher haya im levava. Everything that was in her heart, all of the questions she had, all of the deep questions. Who knows what kinds of philosophical questions were bothering her? The point is that, remember, she came because she was seeking wisdom. She was seeking guidance. This is what I meant by the fulfillment of those words in Devarim, a faraway nation coming. Am chacham v'navo, and this is a wise and understanding nation. If one seeks wisdom, if one wants to know answers, this is where they turn. Vayagid la Shlomo eskol devareha, and Shlomo answered all of her questions. V'lo nelam davar mi Shlomo. There wasn't a single question that Shlomo did not know the answer. Asher lo higidla, that he didn't tell her. So he was able, in a satisfactory way, to help her through her problems, her issues, her existential questions. First, she saw the wisdom of Shlomo, and she then saw the house, the temple that Shlomo had built. And she understood the wisdom of this temple, that this is a place where people can come and pray and focus on God and walk away with answers. She saw the food that was being served on his table, and how his servants sat around. And his servants, how they were dressed and how they presented themselves, and the drink that was served, and those that served the drink, and how they were dressed, and and how he would walk up to the house of God. And literally this means that her breath was taken away. Now, the idea of a king walking up to the house of God is a very powerful image in those days. In those days, kings typically presented themselves as gods. Everyone walked up to them. But to see the king, the wise king, this powerful king with all of this wealth and all and the food and the drink and the servants and everything, but the king himself walks up to the house of God and shows himself to be subservient to God. This is an entirely new idea. This is something different. This is something special. Vatomer al Melech, and she says to the king, Emes hadavar, it is true, Asher shamati b'artzi, that thing which I have heard in my land, all the way far away, al divarecha v'al chochmasecha, about all the things about you, all of the things they say about you, and about your wisdom. Rak am chacham v'novon, as we learned in Deuteronomy and Devarim. This is a nation of wisdom. However, she says, I didn't believe them until I came myself and I saw myself. fulfillment of the idea that all the nations, remember we learned in Solomon's prayer just 2 chapters ago, that all the nations from faraway places will come to this place to seek wisdom. And despite having heard so much that it inspired me to come here with this great a party that came with me, right? I didn't even hear even half of how great your wisdom is. Yosafta ala shmu asher shemati. You have made you are so much more than that news which I had heard far away in my home in Sheba. Ashrei anashecha, praised, or how lucky are your people, Ashrei avodecha ele, and how fortunate are your servants, these servants who omdum lefanecha tamid, that stand before you all the time, b'shomeim es chachmasecha, and they hear your wisdom. Yehi, and this is key. And think about what we learned in Bereshit, what we learned in from the blessing from God's what God said about Abraham in Bereshit back in Genesis, what we quoted in the beginning of this podcast. Yehi Adonai Elohecha Baruch. May the Lord your God be blessed, Asher chafetz b'cha, that He desired you. This is the kind of reaction that we want to see from the other nation. Not jealousy, not anger, but appreciation. That God chose you because He chose the right people, because through you, I have now been uplifted and I have been brought closer to God. L'sitcha, to place you, al kiso, on His throne, l'melech as a king, l'adonai Elohecha, in order for the honor of the Lord your God. Bi'ahavas Elohecha es Yisrael. Your God loves the people of Israel, and it is through His love, and it is with His love, l'hamido la'olam, that He has placed them, the people of Israel, olam, forever. And He made you king. Why? La'asos mishpat u'tzedakah, with the goal of doing justice and righteousness. This is such a powerful and important idea. This is finally the fulfillment, and this is being presented in this way deliberately in order to demonstrate that Shlomo was just about there. And when we're reading this, maybe he was there for a short period of time. But even when we achieve the ultimate goal, we still have to stay on our game and be careful not to falter. Unfortunately, we will see very, very soon, in maybe possibly just next chapter, very soon, we will see failure. Within Shlomo's life itself, we find failure, which we're going to discuss soon. But right now, at this moment, we're there. Titain la melech, and she gave to the king Me'avi Esrim Kikar Zav, 120 talents of gold. This is an immense amount of gold. Uvesamim larov ma'od, and a tremendous amount of spices, ve'evan yikara, and precious stones. There has never been so many spices and such wonderful spices as those that the Queen of Sheba gave to the King Solomon. V'gam avdei Huram, and also the servants of Huram, the king of Tyre, who had an alliance with Shlomo, and Huram had sent many craftsmen and many skilled laborers and many wise men that had all kinds of skills and so on. That those servants of Huram who were there in the court of Shlomo, and the servants of Shlomo themselves, Asher Heviu Zav me Ophir, that they had brought gold from Ophir, which we mentioned before, Hevi, from somewhere, which the ships that had traveled through the Indian Ocean, so somewhere along the coast of Africa, or possibly even farther out. Heviu Atse Algumim, they had also brought algum wood, right, which is usually understood to be, modern scholars think that algum wood is referring to coral, coral that's used to build the Evan Yikara, and precious stones. Vayas HaMelech Esatseha Algumim Misilot Leveit Adonai, and in order to, and he used this coral in order to make paths towards the house of God, Beis HaMelech, and also paths like walkways towards the king's palace. And he also used this algum with the coral to make kinorot u'nubalim lashorim. Those are harps and lyres, musical instruments for those that played music. V'lo niru kahem lefanim be'eretz Yehuda, and there hasn't been any such wonderful instruments like this in the land of Judah before. And Shlomo gave to the Queen of Sheba everything that she desired, which was even more than that which she brought to the king. So the exchange of goods was mutual, and she received even more than she brought, even though we just described the immense amount of wealth that she brought as a gift. And she turned around, and she went back to her land, she and her servants. Vayehi mishkal hazahav, this is verse 13, and the amount of gold asher balish Shlomo b'shana achas in each year. So this is further going on in Shlomo's career. The amount of gold that he had per year that he got in taxes and in profits from the business ventures. Sheish me'ot v'shishim v'sheish kikrei zav were 666 talents of gold. I'm going to continue in a second, but I just want to point a reminder. So this height, this visit of the Queen of Sheba is so important because it really demonstrates the fulfillment of the prophecies and the fulfillment of the purpose of the whole point of being a Jewish people, of entering the land of Israel, of establishing a monarchy. It seems like we got there. We're there. But one can never let his or her guard down. One can always fail. And unfortunately, the story of history is one of successes and one of failures. Levad me'anshei Atarim, let me go back to the description of Shlomo's kingdom. This doesn't even include the number 666 from those who were traders, vasocharim, and merchants, meviim, would also bring even more than what was collected in taxes. The whole malchei Arab and all of the kings of Arabia, upachot haaretz, and the governors, pachot, we've seen this term used in Assyrian literature, the pachot, the governors, the regional governors. So this is probably a little bit anachronistic. This is someone at the time of Divrei Hayamim, at the time of I'm sorry, not Assyrian, I meant Persian, time, using the term to describe what was then. The term pachot probably was not used in the time of Shlomo. Meviim Zohab Shlomo, but they would also, all these governors would bring more gold and silver to Shlomo. Vayas Hamelach Shlomo Masayim Tzina Zohab Shachot. And Shlomo used all of this to make 200 shields out of beaten gold. Sheish Meot Zohab Shachot. He made, which each one, Yala Al each shield was made out of 600 shekels worth of beaten gold. And he made 300. A magain is also a kind of shield of zahav shachot of shlosh meot zahav, each one made out of 300 shekels. Yala ala magain achas would be made into one magain, another kind of shield. And the place where he put all of this was in the Yar Halvanon, the Lebanon forest house. It's assumed the Lebanon forest house is Shlomo's palace, and it was called that because, or it may have been another house, but regardless, it was a house that was built out of the wood from Lebanon. So it was called the House of the Forest of Lebanon. It may have been, according to some understandings, built with towering beams, which made one have the sense that he was in a forest when he was in that house, or it could have just been called that because it was built out of Lebanon wood. He made a huge throne that was made of ivory. And he covered that ivory with pure gold. And there were 6 stairs leading to the throne. And attached to the throne was a like a footstool. Viados mizan, there were armrests on each side. Al makom hashavet, in the place where he was sitting. Ushnayim arios omdene tzaliados. And next to the armrest were 2 lions. And each one of the stairs, there was 2 lions on each side. So there was a total of 12 lions. There was no such throne anywhere for any other king as great as the throne that Shlomo had. And all of the uh, utensils that were used for drinking in Shlomo's palace was gold. And all of the instruments that were used in the Lebanon forest house were also made of pure gold. Ein kesef nechshav b'mei Shlomo l'muhumas. There was so much gold that silver was like nothing in the days of Shlomo, in the days of Solomon. Ki onios l'melech olchos Tarshish, because ships for the king would go all the way out to Tarshish, which is somewhere out in the Mediterranean. Imabdei Churam, and they went together with the servants of Churam, who had very skilled sailors and skilled craftsmen, and so on, as we've seen before. Achas l'sholoshanim, every 3 years they would go back and forth. It took a year and plus X an amount of time to go, and then to do business, and then another year and a half or so to come back. So it would take a total of 3 years for each journey. But Tavona, Nios, Tarshish, the ships from Tarshish would come Nos osav v'chesef, carrying gold and silver, shen habim v'kofim v'tukiyim, and they also came with ivory and monkeys and tukiyim is a beautiful, colorful bird, usually translated as peacocks, or it could be parrots of some sort. So these were very valued items that they would come back from Tarshish with all of these goods. That might give us a little bit of a hint as to where they went. Onios Tarshish is sometimes, by many scholars, translate ships that are capable of going to Tarshish. They would call big ships that go on long trips Oniot Tarshish. So even if they weren't actually heading towards Tarshish, they were still called Oniot Tarshish. So they may have been going in different places. Anyway, verse 22, Vayigdal HaMelech Shlomo mikol malchei haaretz. Shlomo was greater than all the other kings of the land, La'osher, both in wealth, v'chachma, and in wisdom. V'chol malchei haaretz mivakshim et bnei Shlomo lishmoat chachmaso. And all of the kings of the land would come to Shlomo to seek out his wisdom and hear his wisdom, asher nasan elim belibo, that God had given him. So again, the idea, we mentioned the Queen of Sheba, but all the kings would come because Shlomo was wise. They came, ki hi chachmaschem uvinaschem, as we said from Devarim, this is your wisdom, this is your understanding. Vehemivim ishmin chaso, and when they came, they would bring gifts, klei chasef, klei zohav, silver vessels and gold vessels, usilamos, neshek, upusamim, and robes, clothing, neshek meaning, and weapons, and besamim, and spices, susim, upradim, and horses and mules. Tvarshana b'shana, every year they were always coming. Vayhi l'Shlomo arbas alafim urios susim umarkavos, and Shlomo himself had 4,000 stalls for his horses and chariots. Exactly where? Anytime in an excavation is kind of funny. In Israel, they would say, "Oh, these must be Solomon's stables." You have Solomon's stables everywhere. But he must have had stable. He did have stables. Exactly where they were, not 100% clear. But almost every place that's been named as Solomon's stables in Israel has more or less been proven to not be Solomon's actual stables. But regardless, he had 4,000 stalls, and he had 12,000 riders. And he placed them, he had them stay in the cities that were devoted towards the chariots of Im HaMelech B'Yerushalayim, and some of them were also together with the king in Jerusalem. Vayhi Moshel b'chol ha'melachim in Hanahar ad Eretz Plishtim, and he ruled from the river, meaning it's generally understood to be the Euphrates, Biad Eretz Plishtim, all the way to the land of the Philistines on the Mediterranean coast, Biad Gvul Mitzrayim, and south as far as the border with Egypt. And the king led in such a way, and he made it so that there was silver, was like stone in Jerusalem. We know that sycamore is a tree in the Shfela region of Israel. Sycamore was very common, but Erez, cedar, which came from Lebanon and did not grow widely in Israel, there was so much cedar wood that it was as plentiful as the sycamore wood. And they would export or import horses from Egypt, Shlomo to Shlomo, Umikol Aratzos, and from all the other lands. Ushar Divrei Shlomo Harishonim Yachronim, and all of the other events that occurred in Shlomo's life, the early ones and the later ones, Haloim Ksuvim Al Divrei Nasan Anavi, they are written when the as the words of Nathan the prophet, V'al Nevuat Achia Hashiloni, and the prophecy of Achia the Shilonite, who was the another prophet, Uvachazot Yedo Hachozeh, right? That's also probably the same as Edo, regarding Al Yeravam ben Nevat, on Yeravam ben Nevat. Now, this is the remember here in Chronicles, all we're talking about is the grandeur and greatness of Shlomo, just like David. All of his flaws and all of the problems and all of his failures are not being recorded here, but they're hinted to in this verse 29 when it says the nevuah, the prophecy of Achi Hashiloni regarding Yeravam who led a rebellion, and why he led a rebellion, and how it came to be, and the hint, it came to be because of the mah, right? Because of the forced labor. Remember, in the last chapter, we learned about the forced labor of the non-Israelites, which eventually became the forced labor of the Israelites, which eventually led to rebellion. So the seeds of failure are already there. And the problems with Shlomo having all these relationships with so many women that eventually led his heart astray and led him away from God. All of that we're not talking about here in Divrei Yamim. We're talking about the height to which Shlomo reached, but the crashing failure and the subsequent split of the kingdom and civil war, which we're going to read about next time, we're not discussing. We're discussing Solomon's life. We're highlighting, but we're not hiding it either. You can go and read about it. That's why verse 29 is telling you can read about it. Solomon was a leader in Jerusalem over the people of Israel for 40 years. Vayishkav Shlomo and Mavosav, and Solomon literally means he laid down with his fathers, which is a nice way of saying he passed away. It's the common way that Tanakh refers to passing away. Vayikbru, and they buried him the Ir David Aviv, in the city of David, his father. Vayimloch Rechavam beno tachtav, and his son Rechavam became the king in his stead after Shlomo passed away. And as we will see in the next chapter, the kingship of Rechavam did not go so well, to put it mildly, but we'll get there when we study chapter 10 together. Thank you so much for studying chapter 9 together with me. Looking forward to studying the rest of this book of Chronicles. Have a wonderful day.